Birmingham, Alabama, late spring 1996. The city had been catching its breath in the 90s. Fewer sirens cutting the night, fewer headlines that bled. But quiet has a way of fooling folks. On May 18th, under a rinsed blue sky, a passerby stepped into a neighborhood filling station and found the kind of silence that makes the air feel heavy. Money sat abandoned on the counter. A man lay just outside, as if he'd tried to crawl toward daylight, and help that never came. Local officers sealed the scene, moving with careful hands and tight jaws. A trail of red led back through the doorway, behind the register, then out again, a grim breadcrumb path with nothing to end but questions. The cash drawer hadn't been emptied. Small bills still winking under fluorescent light. No witness. No fingerprints that spoke up. Only a time-worn security cassette. Reused, rewound. Recorded over until the image looked like smoke trapped inside glass. In a lab across town, technicians coaxed whatever truth they could from the tape. The picture stuttered, shuddered, bright at the window and muddy at the face. Yet one detail slipped through the blur. A lone patron at the counter. Motions tight and practiced. The transaction bending into menace. Then flash, then ruin. The employee complied. The outcome did not. It wasn't rage. It wasn't panic. It looked like purpose. Detectives canvassed the victim's circles. Friends, kin, anyone who might hate enough to harm. Nothing. The city exhaled, but not for long. 2 months rolled past. 20 miles south, Shelby County woke to something colder. A pawn shop. The kind of place where guitars share glass with wedding rings and old stories. Turned suddenly quiet. A call went out. 2 people down. Deputies arrived to a locked room riddled with the price tags had lost their partners and gun cases stared back. Emptied like pulled teeth. The owner never made it home. A clerk fought to live. Later, a hospital monitor gave the second answer no one wanted. The crime scene was clean in all the wrong ways. Plenty of fingerprints, yes. The everyday kind from regular customers who drifted through in search of cash, a bargain, a memory. Useless, mostly. But the floor, that told a tale. Metal filings near the counter. A key machine's glitter ground into dust, and a small pile of missing trash, as if someone stole the garbage just to keep a secret. The caliber, .380 automatic. The sort of pistol that hides in a coat, but speaks with conviction. Here's where luck favors the patient. The shop owner had once joked about installing a fake surveillance deck, a decoy to spook thieves, while a real recorder stared from the shadows. Turned out it wasn't a joke. The dummy lost its tape during the robbery. The true machine kept breathing, the cassette spinning on like a pulse. When the deputy pressed eject, the truth slid into his hand. The footage didn't play like a movie. It stumbled, blinked, and fought the light. But within those chopped-up frames, 2 young men marched time across the tile, one shouldering a guitar case, both hurting the staff behind the counter. The camera caught the looting, the way a thief's greed becomes inventory control, and then, without struggle, without need, the execution that tied the scene to that earlier afternoon in Birmingham. No resistance, no reason, just the same cold purpose. The tape caught one more piece of the puzzle, a red pickup idling outside, just a hint of color in the glass. When the 2 men finished their violence, both slipped in on the passenger side. That meant a driver, a third presence, out of frame and waiting. Shelby County pushed still images to the local press, grainy cups of shadow ladled into the evening news. Detectives kept a few details off the table. The guitar case, for one, because sometimes the right secret turns a caller into a witness and a rumor into evidence. The phones lit up as planned. One voice said he'd seen 2 young men in Birmingham, guns out, guitar case in hand, stepping from a red truck into a house where street names were currency and family names didn't matter. Turkey, Maine, not their real names, but nicknames have legs in neighborhoods where trust is rented by the day. The Metro unit ran the aliases through its database. Turkey set off alarms. Marcus Presley, 16, a face that matched the shooter's frame from the pawn shop tape. Maine pointed to 18-year-old Lou Samuel Gamble, the second figure under the fluorescent hum. Juvenile records trailed, both used like tales of a storm. Search warrants followed, at a residence tied to Gamble. The door swung to emptiness. But the rooms gave up their whispers. A destroyed cassette from a decoy VCR, spooled guts like confetti, an empty guitar case that looked like the very one marched out of the pawn shop, and in the kitchen stolen trash, tags from jewelry and firearms, glued with the same metallic grit found on that showroom floor. 32 weapons had gone missing that day, an arsenal in the wind, and the killers had promised each other, and anyone who would listen, that they would not be taken alive. That vow traveled quickly, but it traveled faster once the Bureau heard it. A paycheck stub tucked into a coat pocket offered a compass point. A third name, Stephen McKenzie, and a business up in Boston. Out back of an uncle's house, a red pickup sat without plates, wearing a Massachusetts parking permit like a postcard from the road. Under the porch, something else, a paintball gun with a serial number that matched the shop's missing inventory. The truck itself gave up a little, but it did enough to say the trio could be miles away by now, armed and unpredictable. That's when the case crossed a line, and crossed state lines. Shelby County picked up the phone, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation stepped onto the board. Special Agent Jeff Newton listened, weighed the bloodshed, and moved with the urgency these scenes demand. The Bureau sought federal warrants under unlawful flight, UFAP, and pushed the suspects' likenesses, details, and habits across field offices with a speed only a national grid can manage. In cases like this, the FBI doesn't simply arrive. It reorganizes a hunt, builds a map, synchronizes a hands-on clock, and brings sharper tools to a moving target. Boston, 1,000 miles of asphalt way, received the call at speed. Special Agent Joseph Altman clocked the directive. 3 fugitives believed to have killed without provocation, armed with stolen weapons, and boasting they'd shoot their way out. The Bureau distributed wanted posters, set up a tip line designed to catch whispers as well as shouts, and laid surveillance on addresses with even a sliver of promise. No knocking, no sudden moves. Not yet. When the trail is faint, patience is an instrument, not a virtue. Back in Alabama, the home front kept pressing forward. Interviews with friends and rivals, gang associates, anyone who might trade information for a clean night's sleep. The word on the street painted Presley and Gamble as kids playing at power, flashing jewelry, handing out firearms like invitations to disaster. Their absence in Birmingham, the way they suddenly vanished, told its own part of the story. But it was the Bureau's lattice of field offices, the quiet coordination from one jurisdiction to the next, that began to squeeze the map. The case's turning point wasn't a single dramatic arrest or a perfect clue under perfect light. It was a strategy, an FBI cadence, that converted scattered fragments into a timeline, a geography, a set of entrances and exits. The video from the pawn shop, enhanced by federal specialists who live in the world between pixels, gave faces to names and a rhythm to their movements. The Massachusetts parking permit linked the getaway vehicle to a driver. The vow not to be taken alive wasn't treated as bravado. It became a safety protocol, shaping how agents would approach doors, what time of day they'd go, and how many lives they'd risk to save others. For now, the fugitives were still out there, slipping between bus stations and borrowed couches, traveling on adrenaline and bad promises. But the net was tightening, and for the first time since May, the case had a spine, built from cassette hiss, metal filings, and the methodical pressure of federal pursuit. The manhunt in Alabama didn't cool with summer. It grew teeth. By July, the Bureau had wired the map with urgency, every red pin and every name leading back to the same twin phantoms, Marcus Presley and Lou Samuel Gamble. 2 kids, barely men, already carrying themselves like they'd buried conscience somewhere between street corners and broken glass. Shelby County detectives ran on fumes, chasing dead leads through heat that stuck to their collars. Then came the whisper that broke the standstill, a red pickup, seen near the uncle of Gamble himself. The kind of lead you don't ignore. They went quiet, rolling in on the old house without sirens, just a low growl of unmarked engines. The uncle didn't want to talk, not there, not in front of neighbors whose blinds already twitched. But in the slow crawl of conversation, he folded. Yes, the boys had been there. Yes, a third man, too, one with a Boston paycheck and restless eyes. Name of Steve McKenzie. Yes, they'd all left together, headed north. That single confession stretched the case line straight up the eastern seaboard. The Bureau made it federal. FBI agents wired the paperwork for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. UFAP, in Bureau shorthand, and the hunt officially crossed state lines. The moment that warrant ink dried, the chase belonged to the FBI. In Birmingham, Special Agent Jeff Newton reviewed the file, the grainy video stills, the autopsy notes, the roster of stolen firearms, all the echoes of 2 murders committed for nothing but thrill and noise. Find them before they write another chapter, he told his team. Meanwhile, in Boston, the order came down the line to Special Agent Joseph Altman. Priority targets, armed, likely volatile, carrying 32 stolen weapons and the weight of 2 lives behind them. His office sent photos to every precinct, posted the faces on walls and bulletins, briefed the SWAT unit for contingencies. The Bureau doesn't sprint. It calculates. They started with paperwork, the factory John McKenzie once held, the addresses tied to his payroll stub, the relatives who might offer him a couch or an alibi. The owner of the Boston company hadn't seen McKenzie in weeks. His file was clean, sterile, no next of kin, no forwarding address, just a paycheck and a ghost. Agents built a list of possible hideouts. Uncles, cousins, friends of friends. They watched from unmarked cars for hours at a time. Patience and caffeine, the twin pillars of federal stakeouts. It was one of those long nights, when nothing moves but smoke, that a man slipped out the back door of one of the houses under surveillance. Not one of the suspects, just a nervous tenant. The agent stopped him, badges glinting under streetlight, and asked what he knew. He said the 2 men, Gamble and Presley, had been staying there, yes, but they'd left. Packed light, no goodbye. He didn't ask where they went, didn't want to. Fear does that to a man. The Bureau searched the place anyway. No fugitives. But in a drawer, travel bags, half-zipped, abandoned in haste. Inside, shirts that matched the footage from the pawn shop tape. In one of the bags, a handgun with the serial number scratched out, but still whispering history. It was one of the guns stolen from Shelby County. That was enough. Enough to know they were close, but still behind. The next morning, Boston went public. A press conference, no frills, just the facts. 3 armed fugitives, wanted for capital murder in Alabama, believed to be in the area. Dangerous, unpredictable, and possibly desperate. The posters spread through the city, train stations, bus stops, store windows. The Bureau made sure the phones were ready for tips before the ink on the press release had even dried. And then, the first break. A tip came in from Dorchester, south of the city. A red truck, parked outside an apartment where McKenzie might be hiding. 2 others possibly inside. FBI SWAT moved in, quiet as ghosts, positioning themselves around the building with the kind of coordination only training buys. But when they breached, only 1 man was home. Stephen McKenzie, the driver, the quiet one. He didn't fight, didn't run, just froze in the doorway as agents moved in, their weapons cutting lines of light through the hall. They cuffed him, read him his rights, and swept the apartment. What they found was telling. Jewelry from the pawn shop, serial numbers intact. 3 pistols, each one matching a weapon stolen from the Alabama cache. But no sign of the 2 shooters. McKenzie was shipped downtown for questioning, in the Bureau's Boston field office. He sat under fluorescent light, that dull hum that breaks a man faster than shouting. Across from him, Special Agent Altman slid the evidence bag across the table. The jewelry, the guns, the paycheck stub. You've been driving some dangerous friends around, Stephen, Altman said. McKenzie didn't answer. Not right away. When he did, his voice came out flat, like someone who'd run out of lies before he ran out of breath. He told him about the robbery, how Gamble and Presley said no one would get hurt, how they'd scoped out the pawn shop days earlier, laughing about how easy it'd be. Just in and out, he said. But then the gunshots came, fast and wrong. He claimed he'd waited in the truck, didn't know what they'd done until they stumbled back out. The guitar case heavy with stolen iron. He said they'd driven all night to Boston. He said he didn't know where they were now. Maybe true, maybe not. Still, the Bureau played it cool. His statement went into the record. The video, now being cleaned and enhanced by specialists in Quantico, would tell its own story soon enough. Mackenzie was charged with receiving stolen property. It was a small fish charge, but it held him, and that's all the Bureau needed. Time. Down in the lab, the video experts at Quantico worked on the pawn shop footage frame by frame, clarifying, brightening, freezing moments where faces turned to the lens. The contrast filters peeled away the blur, layer by layer, until the human shape of murder emerged clear enough to identify. It wasn't cinema. It was evidence. Back in Boston, agents kept eyes on the last known addresses. The fugitives had vanished, but ghosts always leave footprints if you know where to look. Then came the whisper they'd been waiting for. A relative of one suspect, caught with a stolen gun in his car. He told them the truth, or enough of it. The boys had already left town, headed south again, Virginia. And just like that, the chase redrew its lines once more. 2 kids, a red pickup, an arsenal of stolen guns, and the FBI, now closing in with the patience of time itself. The shadows were running out of road. August 5th, 1996. Boston's morning fog rolled in thick and heavy, but the Bureau's nerves were sharper than the skyline. Overnight, they'd missed the fugitives by inches, literally hours. Presley and Gamble had been staying in a Roxbury apartment tied to Gamble's uncle. By the time SWAT breached the door, the place was empty, but not silent. The air still carried the scent of cigarette ash, fried food, and panic. Inside, agents found travel bags tossed open on the bed, clothes, personal items, and something far more valuable, photographs. One picture showed the fugitives stepping onto a Greyhound bus, faces low, caps pulled down. Their destination wasn't written on the back, but the Bureau didn't need ink to see the line. Virginia. Special Agent Joseph Altman briefed the team. They're heading south. They're tired, desperate, and running out of road. He was right. The FBI's Norfolk Field office received the alert before sunrise. By the time the day broke over the Chesapeake, Special Agent John Harley and his task force were already mobilizing. The fugitives were believed to be headed toward Norfolk or Chesapeake. Gamble had a girlfriend somewhere in that stretch of Virginia, and that gave them a place to look, a heartbeat to follow. That same morning, in a modest apartment complex off a quiet Norfolk street, a tenant heard a knock. It wasn't the police, not yet. It was 2 young men looking for a place to lay low. He didn't ask questions. In those neighborhoods, you learn not to. He let them in. They offered cash. Then silence. Within a day, the Bureau had the address. At 5:30 a.m., the Norfolk Fugitive Task Force rolled up in unmarked sedans. Inside those cars sat federal agents, local deputies, and state troopers, men and women who'd been trading shifts for days, waiting for a whisper just like this one. The team split into 2 units. One would approach from the back fire escape, the other from the front hallway. Quiet entry, no gunfire if they could help it. These 2, Presley and Gamble, had already promised to go out shooting. No one wanted to test their word. They climbed in silence, boots careful against the metal steps, breath steady, safeties off. The windows were fogged with the night's humidity, but behind one curtain, movement. "Go!" came the whisper. The door came open in one violent second. Inside, chaos snapped awake, startled voices, a flash of movement. The first suspect went down fast, Marcus Presley, cut before he even realized the door was gone. Gamble wasn't far behind, found half-dressed, reaching for a pistol that wasn't there. No shots, no casualties, just the end of a long, violent run. After weeks of manhunt, 2 states, and 3 deaths, the fugitives who once swore they'd never be taken alive were sitting in the back of a Bureau sedan, staring out at a sunrise they never expected to see. Back in Shelby County, Alabama, Sheriff James Jones got the call. "We have them," the agent said. It wasn't triumph in his tone. It was relief, the kind that comes only after nightmares stop breathing. The suspects were flown back to Alabama under federal escort. Local deputies met them on the tarmac, wrists cuffed, chains heavy, heads down. The Bureau had done its job. Now justice would do the rest. In separate interrogation rooms, Presley and Gamble sat under identical fluorescent buzz. The hum of consequence. Gamble spoke first, his words heavy with blame. "It wasn't me," he said. Marcus pulled the trigger. I just wanted the money. Presley's version turned the table. He's lying, he snapped. It was his idea. I didn't want to kill anyone. They pointed fingers, lied, twisted stories, until the agents wheeled in a TV cart. The pawn shop surveillance video, the same one they thought they destroyed, rolled across the screen. Frame by frame, it showed everything. The confrontation, the panic, the moment when compliance turned to cold execution. And there on the blinking security light was Marcus Presley, unmistakable, firing at two unarmed people who had done nothing but obey. The room fell silent. Presley stared at the screen, eyes wide, then lowered his head. When he spoke again, his voice barely carried. Yeah, he said, that's me. I did it. He confessed to both murders at the pawn shop, and then, unprompted, to the earlier killing at the Birmingham gas station. Said he thought the clerk was reaching for a weapon. Said he fired before he could think. But the truth was, he did think. And he killed anyway. The trials that followed were swift and merciless. Stephen Mackenzie, the driver, the one who stayed in the truck, was convicted of aiding the robbery. 50 years. Lou Samuel Gamble, the partner, was tried for capital murder. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours. Death sentence. Marcus Presley, the youngest, just 16 at the time of the crimes, received the same fate. 2 separate juries, 2 separate death penalties. When the verdicts came, prosecutors didn't cheer. They just exhaled. The tapes that once blurred and stuttered had become the clearest testimony imaginable, a silent witness that spoke louder than any man in the room. And the Bureau's fingerprints were everywhere in the story, from the federal warrants to the pixel-by-pixel image restoration that sealed the identifications. Without that footage, without the agents who refused to give up on its ghosts, the case might have drowned in rumor and denial. Instead, the truth stood in frame. As the judge read the sentences, reporters described the courtroom air as hollow. The families of the victims sat still, holding hands, staring straight ahead. No applause, just the quiet closure that grief allows. The FBI agents who carried the case for months didn't stay for the cameras. They packed up their files, one last note typed into the record. Case closed, subjects apprehended, evidence preserved. Justice, at last, had found its breath. But the city, Birmingham, never forgot those faces on tape, or how the lens that was meant to guard a pawn shop became the very thing that spoke for the dead. And somewhere in Quantico, that restored footage now sits in the Bureau's archives, labeled and cataloged. A reminder of the night 2 young men traded their futures for 13 minutes agreed. Because sometimes justice doesn't come with a gun or a chase. Sometimes it comes from a single, unblinking eye that never forgets. There's a rhythm to federal work, a kind of quiet precision that hides under the noise of gunfire and headlines. The case out of Alabama had long stopped being local. It had become an interstate symphony of manhunts and coordination. Every field office in tune, every move deliberate, no one breathing louder than they had to. When the Bureau steps in, chaos becomes choreography. From Shelby County to Boston, from Quantico to Norfolk, agents logged every phone call, every grainy photograph, every whispered name on the street. The red pickup wasn't just a truck anymore. It was a signature, an echo that appeared in every report. Special Agent Jeff Newton, back in Birmingham, was the access point. He knew what these young men were capable of. Execution-style killings, done without emotion, without need. He had seen enough cases to know. Men like that don't fade quietly. They burn out, fast and violent. So Newton tightened perimeter. Federal warrants went active across multiple states. Task forces formed. Local police paired with Bureau agents. Their radios speaking in a single rhythm now. Every bus depot, every motel near a highway exit was logged and checked. Still, the fugitives had a head start. Every hour they stayed ahead of the Bureau was another chance for the story to repeat itself in a new town. The FBI doesn't chase, it predicts. They mapped habits, routes, and patterns. Presley and Gamble were young, restless, and drawn to cities where anonymity cost just a few dollars. That meant bus terminals, pawn shops, cheap apartments. Places where cash bought silence. Special Agent Newton coordinated with the Bureau's behavioral analysts, who profiled the pair not as masterminds, but as boys running on panic and pride. Their decisions would be impulsive, reckless. They'd cling to familiar people, girlfriends, cousins, uncles. The agent started tracing phone records of everyone the fugitives might call. It didn't take long. 2 phone numbers connected Boston to a Virginia area code. Both acted within the same week the fugitives fled north. Norfolk, the Bureau tightened the net. Field offices in Boston, Norfolk, and Birmingham shared live updates through secure channels, long before cell data or GPS made that easy. It was phone logs, landlines, and midnight faxes. Old tools, sharp minds. The Norfolk office picked up the hunt. Special Agent John Harley assembled his task force at dawn. Around a coffee-stained conference table, he laid out a simple truth. They killed before, he said. They'll kill again. We bring them in clean or not at all. By August 8, 1996, the Bureau had narrowed the radius to within 30 miles of Norfolk. Phone pings placed the fugitives near the coast. Too close to the girlfriend Gamble had once bragged about. Agents canvassed apartment complexes, flashed badges quietly, asked the right kind of questions, the kind that sound like curiosity instead of law. One resident remembered seeing 2 young men recently, arriving with a woman who rented a 3rd-floor unit. They looked nervous, like they hadn't slept. That was all Newton needed to hear. By 9 a.m., the arrest team was in place. The building was an old walk-up, 3 floors, creaking stairs, one way in and one way out. Not ideal, but manageable. Swap position on the fire escape. Their boots whispering against rusted metal. 2 FBI agents waited in the front hallway. Hand signals rehearsed. The agents didn't have a warrant yet. Not without confirmation that the suspects were inside. So they watched, waited, until one of the residents, an older man, opened the door to throw away trash. Agent Harley showed him the photographs. You seen these boys? The man blinked. Yeah, he said. They're in there, with the girl. That was enough. The team moved. A soft count, 3, 2, 1, and the fire escape door came open under pressure. No warning. No time for a gun to be raised. Marcus Presley was the first to see them. He froze, mouth half open, eyes wide. Gamble reached for a bag by the bedside table. But the weight of 10 federal agents made the decision for him. Hands up. The command sliced the air. Seconds later, it was over. No gunfire, no blood. Just the sound of handcuffs snapping shut and a long, steady breath of relief from men who'd spent months chasing ghosts. Presley's jaw tightened, his bravado draining with the color from his face. Gamble looked away, muttering something about not being the shooter. The Bureau didn't argue. They had what they came for. When the plane touched down in Alabama, the tarmac lights painted the night in amber. Sheriff Jones was there, the same man who'd stood over 2 bodies months earlier, swearing he'd bring their killers in. Now, he watched as the fugitives were led down the steps, wrists bound, eyes hollow. In the interrogation room, the Bureau took the lead. 2 separate interviews, 2 different approaches. Gamble cracked first. He told a story of bad influence, of Marcus Presley, the younger one, too wild, too quick to shoot. It wasn't supposed to happen, he said. Nobody was supposed to die. Presley's version was thinner, colder. He denied everything until the agents rolled in the TV cart. The tape, enhanced by the Bureau's own forensic video lab, flickered onto the screen. The image, once grainy, now sharpened by technology that made truth impossible to deny. Frame by frame, it showed the robbery, the looting, the moment where greed turned to murder. Presley stopped talking. Then, after a long silence, he nodded. Yeah, he said quietly. That's me. He confessed, not just to the pawn shop killings, but to the earlier murder at the Birmingham gas station. Claimed the cashier looked like he was going for a gun, but everyone in the room knew the truth. The kid just liked pulling the trigger. By the time the confessions were typed and signed, the case had become a textbook for federal-local coordination. The Bureau's video specialists, evidence technicians, and interstate fugitive teams had turned 2 blurry tapes and a red truck into convictions. When trial season came, agents sat quietly in the back rows. No cameras, no applause. They weren't there for glory. They were there to witness closure. Mackenzie, 50 years. Gamble, death. Presley, death. Twice over. The justice system spoke the language of finality. The FBI spoke the language of precision. Years later, the Quantico archives would list the case as the Alabama pawn shop murders. In the Bureau's files, it was marked resolved. But for the men who chased those shadows across states and through sleepless nights, the story never really closed. Because in law enforcement, and especially in the Bureau, the case file may end, but the echo of what happened stays. It reminds every new agent who reads it what the job really means. Not vengeance, not fame, just a relentless, methodical pursuit of truth, wherever it runs, however long it hides. And in that pursuit, the Bureau never forgets. When the dust finally settled in Alabama, justice didn't come with sirens. It arrived in the soft shuffle of paperwork and the low murmur of courtrooms. The chase was over. The story had reached its final act. But every man who carried the case, from the deputies in Shelby County to the federal agents in Boston and Norfolk, knew that the end of pursuit is never the end of the echo. Marcus Presley and Lou Samuel Gamble were back where their story began. Only now they sat under a different kind of light, cold, steady, and inescapable. The FBI had delivered them alive, something they'd sworn would never happen. Now, with nowhere to run, they faced the quiet machinery of justice. In the interrogation rooms, their words spilled in fragments, half-truths wrapped in fear. Presley, the younger one, spoke with a strange calm, as if the confessions were a rehearsed line from a play he no longer wanted to perform. He told them about the pawn shop, about the red truck, about how it was never supposed to happen that way. He said the gun jammed, that he cleared automatically, like a reflex he didn't understand. He said he didn't mean to kill anyone, but every agent in that room knew better. The video didn't lie. Gamble was a different kind of defiant. He tried to sound remorseful, but it came out hollow, excuses stacked like playing cards. It was all Marcus, he said. I didn't pull the trigger. The agents didn't argue. They just listened, recorded, and let the truth speak through tape and image. The confession itself wasn't the turning point. It was a technology. The quiet work of the Bureau's forensic specialist at Quantico, who had taken a blurry, half-array security recording and turned it into a clear, damning witness. They pulled clarity out of static, rebuilt faces from the fog, frame by frame, until the moment of execution became visible in cold, digital precision. That tape would later be called Exhibit 1. The jury didn't just see it, they felt it. When the trial began, the courtroom held the weight of a city's grief. Families of the victims sat behind the prosecutors, hands folded, faces unreadable. The defense tried to paint the suspects as lost boys, victims of their own upbringing, desperate, misguided. But the tape played on a monitor, and the room fell to silence. The images were grainy, but the truth was unmistakable. Two men, calm, deliberate, ending lives that surrendered without resistance. The jurors didn't look away. Some later said they couldn't sleep that night. Marcus Presley was sentenced to death. Twice. Lou Samuel Gamble, the same. The third man, Stephen Mackenzie, who'd driven the truck and waited outside, escaped the needle. 50 years behind bars. When the verdicts were read, no one celebrated. There were no cheers, no applause, only the low sound of chairs scraping as people stood to leave. Justice had been done, but it didn't bring anyone back. The agents who had followed this case across 3 states didn't stay for interviews. They packed their files, logged their evidence, and slipped out of the courthouse into the Alabama night. For them, the victory was quieter, measured not in headlines but in certainty. The killers were caught. The story was complete. Later, the pawn shop tape was stored in the Bureau's archives, preserved under a label that read, "Case closed." But to those who'd seen it, that phrase never quite fit. The footage had been more than evidence. It was a mirror reflecting the cold precision of violence and the stubborn persistence of law. In the end, that's what the FBI had given Birmingham. Not just arrest, but truth distilled and undeniable. The Bureau's legacy in this case was one of discipline and patience. They didn't chase the wind. They followed patterns. They trusted forensics, not luck. They turned old videotape and telephone records into a net that no fugitive could slip through. And somewhere inside the Hoover building, where the Bureau's files live under fluorescent quiet, the Alabama case remains a reminder. That technology may capture crime, but it takes human resolve to capture the men behind it. For the families, closure came not with relief, but with a kind of peace that sits deep and still, like the calm after a storm. They knew the killers were gone, and the faces of their loved ones had not been forgotten. For the agents, it was another line in a long ledger of justice. Another night when the Bureau proved that even the darkest crimes can't outrun the light forever. The city of Birmingham moved on. The gas station reopened. The pawn shop rebuilt. But in the quiet hours, when the streets hum with that peculiar southern stillness, some say you can still feel the story breathing. The echo of a case that started with silence and ended with a single, unblinking eye that refused to close. Justice, in the end, doesn't make noise. It doesn't clap its hands or smile for cameras. It moves quietly, like a closing door, like the soft click of file drawer sealing one more story away. The Alabama pawn shop murders were over, at least on paper. The killers were locked behind steel. The families had their verdicts. The Bureau had its closure. But cases like this one, the ones soaked in senselessness, have a way of staying with the people who carried them. In the months that followed, Agent Jeff Newton kept the case file on his desk longer than most. Not because he doubted the outcome, but because he understood what it represented. The Bureau's job wasn't just to catch killers. It was to prove that precision, patience, and resolve could still outmatch cruelty. When he looked at those black and white mugshots of Presley and Gamble, he didn't see monsters. He saw what happens when recklessness meets opportunity, when youth turns cold before it ever turns wise. They'd been armed with 32 stolen guns, but more dangerous than any bullet was their belief that they could outrun consequence. The Bureau taught them otherwise. Newton once said in an internal memo, "This case didn't hinge on luck. It hinged on persistence. Every failure left a breadcrumb, and we followed everyone." That phrase, "we followed everyone," became something of a quiet motto around the field office. Because in truth, that's what the Bureau does best. It doesn't kick down doors in a blaze of glory every time. Sometimes it just waits, listens, collects the fragments others overlook, until those fragments start to form a picture no one can deny. The Alabama case had another legacy too, a technological one. The video enhancement work from Quantico's lab became a benchmark for future investigations. What had once been an almost unrecognizable blur was transformed, through patient digital refinement, into courtroom evidence that couldn't be disputed. It was proof that technology and tenacity could turn the faintest whisper of truth into a shout. Other field offices studied the methods, frame analysis, contrast restoration, cross-state data coordination, and adopted them. The Bureau doesn't waste good lessons. It refines them, files them, and uses them to sharpen the next chase. But even in that triumph, the weight of the story remained. Because somewhere behind every headline and every clean arrest record are the victims. The shop owner, the clerk, the man at the gas station who just wanted to finish his shift and go home. They didn't get to see the day justice arrived. Their lives were the reason this story was written at all. Late one evening, months after the trials, Newton drove past the old pawn shop. It had reopened under a new name, with fresh paint and brighter lights. No traces of what had happened remained. Not in the glass, not on the floor. Only the faint hum of the security camera above the counter. Its red light blinking like a heartbeat. That camera, that small, unassuming machine, had done what no witness could. It had remembered. And that's what this case was really about. Memory. The memory of a crime that could have vanished without evidence. The memory of agents who refused to let it fade. The memory of how one piece of forgotten technology spoke louder than fear, greed, or denial. When the Bureau sealed the file, they stamped it with 2 words, case closed. But those words never mean forgotten. Inside every closed case, there's an echo, a reminder that darkness doesn't disappear. It just retreats until the next investigation calls it back into the light. For the citizens of Birmingham, the echo became part of their landscape, a cautionary story whispered by store clerks and gas station attendants, passed down like folklore. And for the FBI, it became part of their DNA, another thread woven into a long tapestry of persistence. Every new agent at Quantico eventually hears about it. the red truck, the blurry tape, the two boys who thought they could outrun the law, and the team that proved they couldn't. That's how the Bureau remembers, not with speeches or memorials, but with stories, because stories last longer than headlines. And sometimes, the only way to honor the dead is to keep telling the truth that caught their killers. In the end, justice wasn't a gun drawn in the dark or a car chase through city streets. It was a single grainy video, a camera that refused to look away, and the people who refused to stop watching. That's how the FBI found them. That's how the story ended. And that